Hi. So a few years ago, I was invited to a very prestigious prep school in America called Andover. I don't know if many of you know of it. And I was there to give a talk on openness. And I was talking to the kids about what it meant to be open and how it was important to be accepting and, that it was actually more than being accepting of difference and accepting of other cultures, but it was about radically opening your mind to possibility and infinite potential, yeah? And I could tell at a certain point that their eyes were glazing over and they weren't really getting it, And they were like, well, when it was the Q&A time, they kept saying, well, is this a religious idea you're talking about, this openness? Like, what is it? And finally, I said to them, look, here's what I'm talking about. You guys are all being taught that you're the best and brightest and smartest and most innovative kids in the world. And you think that when you graduate from this high school and then you go on to one of the best colleges in the world, that when you're finished, you will be ready to run the world and be in charge of everything, and that you will be thought of as a genius. That's the pattern that you are being put on. That's your path. And I said, but there are young people all over the world who are being educated in ways that are much different, much broader, much vaster than you can even imagine. And they are from countries that you have never even heard of, right? I said, so what are you going to do when you graduate and you step out onto the stage and you're ready and you think you're the smartest and you realize that you're not? And that all of the ideas that you've been holding about yourself and about America and about our superiority supposedly in the world are not holding true at this moment. Who are you going to be? What are you going to do? What are you going to need at that moment? And they looked at me. I said, yeah, you're going to need openness. Because if you don't have openness at that moment, you're going to go crazy. You're not going to know who to be, how to create yourself anew, right? Openness is being able to let go of the ideology, of the ideas, of the identity that you were raised with in the face of a completely new reality. You are going to have to be open to let your mind expand. And then they got what I was talking about. So that idea started to culminate in my mind one day when I was flying out of the lovely island archipelago of Hawaii, where I live. And I was on a plane, and I was sitting next to a young girl who was at the window, and she was so excited by everything that she was seeing out the window. She said, look at the gorgeous ocean, we're up here in the sky. Look at the factory with the smokestack. Look at the sugarcane fields. Look at how beautiful everything is. And her excitement was just incredible, It was like everything was fresh to her. And I looked around at the rest of us, and we were all looking at our iPads and looking through magazines, and we just couldn't, who cares, we were thinking. And I said, you know what? I'm not going to surrender my joy in this moment. I'm going to really try to do this. I'm going to get excited. So I looked out the window down at the island, and I saw the smokestack at the factory, and the first thing I thought was, there are the smokestacks that are, giving all of our kids on the island asthma. And then I said, and there's the lovely blue-green ocean that is probably polluted with nuclear radiation from Fukushima. And I said, and there are the lovely homes that are owned by, people who have come and colonized this island. And I started to think about how only 1% of Hawaii is owned by Hawaiians. And I started to think of all of the millions of people who were killed when the islands were colonized. And by the end of it, I was so exhausted with my own ideological perspective that I just had to practically, lie down on the seat. But I became very conscious of the fact that I could not see the world outside of my ideological perspective at that moment. And that was a real problem, because I had lost not only my joy, but my sense that things could be different, that I could see the world differently, that there could be another way of engaging and interfacing with reality. I had become so locked into it. So then I started to think about what that meant for all of us, that we all are born and raised in a specific place and time, and we are expected to follow the social norms and the ideologies that we were raised with. But what if those social norms and those ideologies themselves are fundamentally divisive? What if ideology itself, whether it's positive or negative, you know, and those are judgments, what if that being forced to see the world through one specific lens itself is the problem, right? How can we be free if these ideas shape us constantly and we can't let them go? And I know most of us have found ourselves in situations, I know I did quite a bit, where we're asked to defend these ideas that we're given and these ideologies that we're holding. And what if we're held captive by the ideas themselves? What if it's the ideas that keep us from being free, right? So I started to think about that and to really feel sorrow and sadness about that, right? So then I had the wonderful opportunity to go speak in a place called Little Rock, Arkansas. And Little Rock, Arkansas is the site of the integration of the Central High School there in 1957 in the Civil Rights Movement in America. And I was excited to go there because I was thinking about this issue of ideology and whether or not we could be, you know, free. And I thought, well, I'm a child of the Civil Rights Movement, and my parents met in the Civil Rights Movement. My mother was an African-American writer who was called down by Dr. King to register voters and to help black people to feel enfranchised. And my father was a young white Jewish civil rights attorney who worked very hard to integrate public schools. And so I thought, well, this is a good opportunity to go back to the South 40 years later and to see what happened when one ideology was supplanted with another, or one ideology that was thought of as positive, which was integration, was disruptive of this other ideology, which was segregation. So I went back, and the first day was really okay. And I spent some time with some students, and they were, very open and very lovely. And I thought, oh, this is great. These are all black students. They're at this incredible school. Integration is a success. One ideology trumped another. It's wonderful. And then as I was walking out of the school, a couple of the students who were with me were actually visiting from Mississippi, which was the state right next to Arkansas, which was the state where I was born, and the state where my father worked so hard to integrate the public schools. And they said, we can't believe the kids in the school were able to look at their cell phones. We can't believe the kids in the school had black teachers. We can't believe the kids in the school could wear whatever they want. And I said, what are you talking about? And they said, well, in our school in Mississippi, if we look at our cell phones, we're given something that's called inside school suspension. And I said, oh my God, what is that? Instantly horrified. And they said, well, if we are caught doing any of the infractions, right, we are put into a tiny windowless room for 30 days, all day of school, from 8 to 4 for 30 days, for doing something like looking at your iPhone or wearing a shirt that's not appropriate to the principal. And I was so alarmed and so dismayed. I was looking at these gentle, beautiful students, and I thought, how is this happening? And I started to ask them more and more, and they were telling me, this is part of what advocates are calling the school to prisons pipeline, that in America we are actually tracking our kids straight into prison, and this is part of how it's happening. We're having prisons inside the school and not calling it prisons, right? So I was heartbroken, and I was thinking, oh, how would this be? And then I called my father, and I said, how do you feel about this as someone who fought so hard for integration? And he said, some things change, but so much stays the same. And he said, even at the time, people were doubting whether or not bringing the ideology of integration was the right thing to do, because when people were segregated, there were still African Americans who were able to get quality education, and there were still African Americans who were able to have emotional and psychological stability and health. But now, with integration, there are all of these new problems that are emerging, right? So he felt very sad, and my thought was, is this just another version of us trying to solve problems with our intellect, but using ideology and thinking that our intellects, that our minds, that our points of view, that our perspectives are actually going to end up with the freedom and the peace that we're looking for? And I started to think historically and how we think about progress and how we think that one idea is going to solve everything, right? It's going to be the new idea and it's going to open up the sky and we're all going to get along and there will finally be peace, but that has not happened. And I think it has to do with the way that we use our ordinary mind to try to approach problems that are cosmic, that are huge, that are beyond the intellect. So the next day, I'm happy to say, I went and I spoke about one of my books and my life growing up as a biracial person, and how I had to go back and forth between a very kind of wealthy upper-class white community and a very feminist Afro-Bohemian community. My parents divorced and I used to go back and forth. And how I had to put on these identities and perform ideologies and perform these narratives of identity, and how hard that was for me. And the kids were, the students, they were with me, and they said finally, well, how did you get out of that? How did you escape? How did you get free? And I said, well, I gave the thing that I always say, which is, well, at some point I learned that I was playing different roles, and I no longer wanted to play a role. I wanted to see if there was someone behind the mask that I was performing. When I wasn't the jappy Jewish girl, who was behind there? When I wasn't the hip black girl, who was that? If I wasn't the hardcore feminist, who was behind that? If I wasn't fighting for racial equality, who was behind that? I had all of these identities, but I didn't have a sense that there was something else sovereign underneath all of those performances. And so I told her that. I started to really meditate on that. And I started to think, I told her, that about Einstein, and how when people asked him how he came up with the theory of relativity, one of the things that he said was, when I was a young child, when I was 13, I had a dream that I was sledding down a hill in the snow, and I was going so fast that I was sledding at the speed of light. And he said, and the rest of my scientific career was about meditating on that one idea. So I said to her, I had to become very comfortable with the idea that I am bigger than the ideas that I hold, that there is something about the human capacity of mind that is larger than these different ideologies that we hold, and that perhaps the answers that we're looking for are out there, not in these different contrivances of identity. And she said, okay, the smart kid. And she said, well, how did you do that? How did you get there? And I said, well, I was lucky enough to have a really wonderful, wise teacher. And one of the things that he said to me that changed my life forever was that the human mind is vast like the sky. It is vast like space, infinite, full of potential. And ideas in the human mind are like stars and planets in space. But that really, there's far more space than there are planets and stars. And that if you can learn to live and dwell in that space and not be afraid, that there's potential there to rest, to dream, to begin to see the world in a new way. And that was very liberating for me, right? So as I told the kids at the Andover, the school, I was not telling them, you should all just walk around, with no ideas and just be space cadets, right? It's not about just floating around. You still have ideas and you still have thoughts, but you now understand that there's another place that you can visit, that these stars and these planets and these ideas are not destinations in themselves. They are not the resting place for your mind. They are just places to visit. And that perhaps we can think about finding answers in the larger archaeology, the larger realm of this spaciousness of mind. And we can actually, instead of being just earthlings, we can be intergalactic travelers. We don't have to go to outer space to find anything. We can look into the inner space of our vast minds. So this is my approach, right? To finding a way to liberate ourselves from ideological rigidity and thinking that the peace that we're searching for is going to be found through the intellect and ideology, because when we look at history, we see that ideologies follow ideologies and follow ideologies, and we still here today are suffering. There is another way, and my hope is that all of us, as we move forward, can rethink the vast space of our mind and dwell there until other answers emerge.